Good morning, Suzuki Science. So, I'm looking at the question of the week. And in the question of the week, I think now, Friday, is a good time for us to take it up. So, I gave you 4 scenarios, and many of you who went through the activity, well, I guess we didn't really have a consensus. So, looking at some of the answers here, we see that some of you did your own research, and from your own research, you determined that you couldn't find a particular answer or it proposed somewhere. Some of you felt that if each one of these were true, that they'd be sensationalized or placed in the headlines somehow, and you would have seen information about it. Just so you know that some of these things that were on here are from a long time ago, so they wouldn't be making headlines in 2020 because they were first designed in the 1970s or 60s. Some of you had a gut, but there's normally something that leads to that gut reaction. The way the word was put together, the phrase was put together, the anecdote, the story, the headlines are put together. There's something about it that doesn't sound quite as scientific as some of the other articles, so it's more than just a gut. Some of you did play two of you did play the 2 truths or 3 truths and a lie and provided your own examples. So if you didn't get a chance to play theirs, I would encourage you to read through it and then highlight the white portion here, and then you'll see what the answer looks like down here somewhere, right? Others of you provided evidence as to why that particular statement was wrong with your own kind of research truth. In many cases, your research truth didn't really address the question, so it didn't prove it right or wrong, per se. So let's look at them again. So scenario 1, nuclear pulse propulsion. So nuclear pulse propulsion was a thing. Project Orion was a thing. If you were to Google Project Orion and use something like NASA or something like that, try to get to a reputable source. And when you look at this, you'll see that the nuclear bombs, the amount of energy that they release, can propel very large masses, relatively speaking, from the Earth's surface out into outer space, escaping our gravity well, and then they can also accelerate it in space relatively quickly. There are problems in the fact that we are blowing up nuclear bombs both close to the astronaut and on the Earth. So that's a little scary. And the acceleration happens in spurts, right? And so as these spurts are happening, it's going to be a very bumpy ride for your astronauts. And you typically want a smooth ride. If we were in a situation where we needed to get people off of the Earth very quickly, as a matter of fact, this particular method of acceleration and launching material into outer space is one of the few ways that we have of getting something that big off the Earth that quickly. So it is true. The Project Orion was once upon a time a thing. They invested a lot of research into it before they gave it up for nuclear rockets, for rockets that were going to propel spaceships from Earth to space. So if I were trying to prove that was true, I'd be looking at a variety of sources, and not saying that everything on NASA is true and everything on every government site is true, but generally speaking, if you can find scientists or engineers that are supporting or writing or talking about it, then you can do deeper research to get a better understanding of whether or not it's true or false. So here's a NASA website that talks about Project Orion as well. It also talks about the new Project Orion that is supposed to go to some deep space research, and they use the same name because of the history of the name from the original Project Orion. The next question was scenario 2. We present BrainNet. So BrainNet is a thing. It's very simple, though. We don't have the ability to take a person and connect them to a machine and have them think about their day and think about how much they want, what they want to eat for breakfast or lunch or dinner, and then just send that information to another person. This is very much in its infancy. But if you were to search BrainNet, most of the results will bring you to this article, to bring these to these research articles. And the research articles are written in a way that's very scientific method. They're communicating their research and explaining to you how they went about connecting people to these electroencephalography and transcranial magnetic stimulation, how they're able to use that combination of technologies to get a sender to look at a screen. And basically it was two screens. And one screen had one kind of image and the one had another kind of image. And so the person who was looking at the sender had to think in a certain way. They had to think about a color or a food, and they had to think about something completely different. And so they're able to send these two different signals, and the person on the other side, if they understood the code, could then determine what that person was thinking. And so when you hear it like this, it sounds very rudimentary, and it is. But when you're designing something, you often start with a prototype that is quite simple, and it won't have all the features that you'd like. And through more research and more design and a little bit of luck sometimes, a lot of motivation, you can design something that is hopefully closer to the end goal. But BrainNet is a thing. Other things that are very similar that are allowing us to explore brain-to-brain communication. Look at this. This is from 2018. Two scientists implanted a false memory into a mouse. We have the Neuralink, which Elon Musk has been touting, and he wants to connect the brain in such a way that it's able to talk to these biological interfaces and talk to a machine and allow the machines to do work just by thinking. And he made a relatively large announcement talking about how he was going to put these brain reading threads that would allow that communication to occur. And from BrainNet, you can imagine that the next level, I don't know if you guys have seen that show on Amazon Prime, I think it is. It's called The Feed. And you've probably seen a lot of science fiction shows and movies that have people talking to each other, communicating with each other, communicating with the internet, a social network of brains that allows this communication. So this is the first step towards that. So it exists. So that brings us to scenario 3. So in scenario 3, if you look at the headline, NASA scientists have detected evidence of a parallel universe. So here is the New York Post. So just looking at the look of this, if you were to do this search and you came to this site and you saw, well, look at what else is on this page. Right. We know about George Floyd, we know about Central Park, Karen, and but look at the page. It's a newspaper. Look who they're referring to, the Daily Star. If you do some research on the New York Post and the Daily Star, and you find out the quality of their reporting, that enough would let you be suspect of this particular article. The other ones, I use a NASA resource, I use some other scientific journals with the language. It was corroborated by many different resources if you looked at it. This one here, there's truth. There is some truth. But the way that this particular article sensationalizes the idea that NASA has found a parallel universe is obvious, I would say. It's kind of blatant. And the words that they use and the way they write it. So some of you mentioned that you had a gut instinct about how number 3 was wrong. And like I said, it was more than just a gut. You were putting some things together. You just couldn't communicate and be very specific as to why you had that gut feeling. So there was an original article. And that original article appeared in the New Scientist. And if you looked at the activity, I talked about this thing called preprint servers. And what happens is a lot of people who are looking to write about science and technology and get people engaged in what the world might look like and what new and interesting is happening, they'll scan through these preprint servers where there's information printed. They'll actually scan through some other journals as well, and they'll key on some words that look like they're going to, if they write about it in the correct way, then people are going to look at it. And so the idea of talking about an alternate universe that's, time flowing backwards, that sounds pretty cool. But they didn't really read the entire article properly. And even the scientist who wrote this, when he saw how people were misrepresenting his information, kind of laughed about it, but it's not true. So number 3 is not true. There is an article, an original article, that talks about some of this weird physics, but the idea that's proposed in the article has been sensationalized. It's been twisted so that it's no longer correct. And in the last one, super toxic environments are often fatal to all living organisms. So someone had mentioned that the way the first three were written, it seemed more formal, and the second one was more informal. And you're very right. I took this one from a book called Soonish. And Soonish is a book that is designed to engage a different type of reader. So if you're into science and you want to figure out what's happening really soon, then you'd probably read it regardless. But some people, they're a little bit turned off by books that have just straight text and they're very technical. And this book was written by a couple of people they write comics. But the science that they have in here is very sound, and they've done an enormous amount of research. So if you went to the back of this book, you'd see about 40 or 50 pages of references. So everything is referenced in detail. And so as you go through this book focuses on the things that appear to be just around the corner. The technologies that you think are science fiction, but they're not quite. It explores things that are completely science fiction, that they're not close. But it talks about things that are just around the corner. So we had the ability to modify organisms. We know this. We've talked about this in many of our science and biology classes specifically. And as we modify these organisms, we're giving them unique traits. And so it's not too far-fetched. As a matter of fact, it's been done to modify fungi and bacteria in such a way that they react to chemicals, environmental stimuli by expressing a protein. And we know that certain fish and certain deep-sea organisms are able to glow using the Lux gene. So being able to combine genes that make organisms glow different colors based on the expression of certain proteins is not unreal. It's a matter of fact brilliant. So they are working on making these environmental organisms that when you place them into a certain condition, they might glow red or glow green. We're working on putting certain organisms inside our body, and as they go through your blood system and then you look at the urine or stool and you analyze it, the bacteria that you ate or ingested somehow, it would basically act as a collector, a receiver, and it would react in a certain way if it interacted with cancer chemicals, because most cancers release very specific markers into your body, and these biomarkers can be detected. They can be detected either directly or by ingesting potentially a microorganism that's able to detect these biomarkers, and then when you collect it on the other side, you can look at the bacteria, the modified fungus, and see if it's changed in some way. So this is stuff that is in development. This is stuff that they're looking at because we do have the science for it. We just have to put it together. So scenario 3 is also a possibility. So scenario 4 is also a possibility. Scenario 3 is the one that's a lie. This is not true. Okay. So that's it. That's their recall. For those who played, great. Hopefully you enjoyed the activity, and hopefully next week we have another activity. Anyone who has ideas on an activity, please do share, and maybe we can somehow create a new question of the week using your idea.